welcome to Procurement Pivots, the podcast for procurement professionals wanting to navigate change successfully and create career success on your own terms. I'm Donna Bowden, procurement career coach and founder of Narrate Your Career.
And I'm Laura Sellers, executive coach for procurement and founder of Coaching for Procurement. And between us, we bring almost 25 years of supporting and working with procurement professionals. And it's fair to say we've navigated many of our own career pivots along the way. And now we're here to help you do the same.
Each episode will share practical strategies, honest conversations, and expert insights to help you confidently tackle the changes and challenges in your procurement career.
Let's get started.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Procurement Pivots podcast. It's great to have you here with us for another episode. And today we're going to be talking about a really, really important topic that is just so fundamental in procurement careers. So we're going to be talking about influence today. Laura, do you want to share kind of why we've picked this topic? I know it's one that you're very, very passionate about as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think we've did we do a poll on this as well, actually, on LinkedIn, where we did get asked for this one as well. So we've listened, and it is definitely a topic that comes up. Influence feels like a holy grail, I think, sometimes when it comes to procurement, what they're faced with having to do with the buy-in that they need to get from the business to hold procurement in that high esteem and in a strategic light, let's say. So it's definitely something that comes up time and time again when it comes to coaching conversations for me, do a lot of workshops around it, and it's a very personal journey, I think, influence is. So yeah, that's why it's important to me. What about you? How does it show up in your conversations?
Well, I would say even before what I do now. So, for some of you listening that I don't know, I was a recruitment leader in procurement for a long time, and I supported businesses to hire their senior procurement talent in. And one of the first things that organisations would always say to me when they were hiring those leaders in was, we're really looking for someone that is able to demonstrate that they can influence the most senior and often the most challenging of stakeholders. That was right up there. And, I can't recall many conversations where I was supporting businesses to bring those people in. So, it's very much, it's fundamental at kind of, at senior levels. And so I just think it's really, really important, but it's also really difficult, and so I think it's a really important topic, and I know a lot of people are hopefully, well, we hope you'll take quite a lot from what we talk about today. So Laura, do you want to kind of kick off in terms of, where should we start the conversation today, would you say?
Yeah, I would like to start with the mindset element, because before we get to anything in terms of techniques, what you need to think about, I think that it's such, as I said earlier, it's a personal journey, influence. And first of all, I think it starts with your own relationship with influence, what you think about influence, how you feel about influence, because I think it can be a real reluctance for some people to engage and influence if they don't have a good relationship with it themselves. They might feel that people can be quite manipulative when it
Mm,
comes to being influential. If they feel they have been influenced or manipulated by somebody, it's a really complex relationship. And we were talking before we recorded this around, influencer is now a
yeah.
title. It's a title in today's world. It's a job in today's world,
Mm,
being an influencer. So, and that itself brings a lot of perception. So the mindset and the perception of influence plays a huge role in
yeah.
your ability, in your willingness
Yeah.
to influence and in your capability. So I would always encourage, and it's not necessarily in the first conversation, it usually does come up, but I would always explore or encourage anyone to explore what your own relationship with influence is, because
Mm,
that is going to dictate, or it is going to at least guide and give a direction to where you take influence in your role. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I would also say is and I know we've alluded to this when it comes to perceptions of procurement. It's in the truth episode. I think we've mentioned it in other ones. We're doing another episode of naming all of our past ones, Donna. But what I would also say is that because procurement is in this ascension, it's in this evolution stage and it looks different and feels different in every single organization. There is also that perception of, well, if procurement's down here yet, we're not yet at that seat at the table, or we're not yet where we want the function to be. That also clouds the perception of influence. So if there are power
Mm,
dynamics in the room, you're having to influence people who are several layers above you, who are more senior to you. And I know I mentioned it, I'm sure it was the truth episode, where if you're walking into the room and you're thinking, well, I'm just a buyer, I'm just procurement, who am I to influence this CEO, this CFO,
yeah,
this person? Then we've got to really be mindful of how can we put some more positive thinking and proactivity into that approach to influence before we even think about the techniques, because
mm,
you can learn influence skills, you can find out what they are, you can read books, but
yeah,
if you're not confident in your own abilities, in who you are, in what you stand for, the skills aren't going to touch the side without you looking at that mindset piece. So for me, it's an intertwined
yeah.
piece of work that we do between the skill
Mm,
set and the mindset to do it.
mm. Some brilliant points in there, and I think particularly coming back to the kind of the levels and layers structurally within an organization, like actually you know there are some people sometimes very early on in their procurement career, in their procurement journey, where they're being expected and told, your job, you just need to go and influence those people. And it's being given to them as a task almost,
Mm.
but it's a skill. And often I think they're being put in situations where they're not being given the skill and the training and the development, the tools, sorry, to kind of to understand how to go about doing that. So I think like for some people, particularly kind of more that maybe mid-level that are for the first time suddenly now in maybe, a category management type role where they're getting exposure to much, much more senior people than before. But not all businesses are providing that support for their employees to actually learn how to do this stuff. It's almost just like an expectation, a given. Oh, just do it. Like it's a real like just go and influence them over there. But there's a lot to it, like you say. So yeah, I think we wanted to acknowledge that as well. That some companies do this really well, and they are providing their teams and equipping their teams with the right tools and the right kind of skills, but many aren't. And so that's really, really difficult if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're doing this for the first time. But I think even, really experienced senior professionals, that have been influencing people for years, like sometimes they will also come across particular individuals or a particular function that can just feel much, much harder than what they've done previously. And sometimes that can really knock your confidence when you think you should know what you're doing. You should be able to influence that person, and suddenly what you've done previously with others isn't working.
Yeah, and I think, that point you made about it being like a task that's assigned, it's
Mm,
an art form. It really
yeah.
is an art form influence. And it comes with practice. I think you need to have a really good grasp of your own strengths and your own personality types, because I think this can go tie back to visibility. And we're thinking, oh, those who are able to influence are those who are the loudest in the room, who are confident. And we might relate that to people who are very results driven. So if you're familiar with any personality tests, like you've got the DISC and the insights models, where you've got the colours, you look at the loud or the results driven, the confident seeming people who are like the reds, the yellows, who are very people driven as well. You might think that if you relate to actually a blue or a green color or an introvert, that those skills are not open to you. They're not a possibility because they just don't fit with your personality type. So what I would say, there's possibility in all of those colours, in all of
Mm,
those personality types. If you relate to those two models, if you don't, you might wonder what I'm talking about with colours. But basically understanding and getting to grips with your own personality style so you can build on that strength is a
mm,
really good first stepping stone to be able to do. And then recognizing those who you are seeking to influence, what their personality types are, because there will be some people who you might naturally gel with and others that you don't. Um, and I see this a lot, yeah, on LinkedIn, this thing about how procurement need to learn from sales or need to learn from marketing. And of course, there are some shared skill sets there, but always start with self, is what I would say. And then I would also say, even to narrow it down rather than thinking you have to influence everybody, which when you're
yeah.
working with indirects, you're just thinking about all your internal stakeholders. Really just focus on the one person it's going to make a real difference to you to be able to build that relationship with and influence.
Mm,
So I think that we've talked about in the episode before this about planning, about you're spinning all these plates.
yeah.
Let's narrow it down to one person so you can measure that impact and that result. So I would always encourage that as well.
Yeah. And again, we are plugging previous episodes, but I think the word intention for me kind of, pops up here. It's really thinking about kind of, what is the purpose with that, with that individual. And we're talking a lot here about the internal influence piece, but actually, influence affects all aspects of your career internally, self, how you feel about this, but also it's kind of, externally as well. We've spoken again previously about positioning, and essentially if you're successfully positioning yourself in the marketplace, whether that's internally for future internal opportunities or externally, you are essentially influencing others because you're showcasing your credibility and often the impact that you've had with other people. And that demonstration, that proof of what it is you've done historically is what's actually kind of shaping the thoughts of that person that's kind
Mm.
of with you, or seeing what you've spoken about, etc. So I think influence, it comes back to just being kind of intentional, and we can't influence everything, but thinking about in this instance internally, like who are the key people, or what is it, or why, like also why is it that we're needing to and wanting to kind of influence that person or that situation.
Yeah, I mean there is that purpose behind it, like you said, the what, which we've covered a few times
Yeah.
depending on the goal. Now, something where I do see influence not go to plan, or where I think it impacts somebody's relationship with influence, like we were talking about before, is when it's not done in a genuine and legitimate way. So I've known a leader saying, "I'll just make them think it's their idea." Where there's a power imbalance there because genuine, authentic, positive influence comes from being on and treating the other person as the same level, seeing them as a human,
Mm,
because there's nothing worse than someone thinking they're a good influencer by trouncing over other people and not listening to other people's needs. And that's where I think a lot of people get it wrong, where they might feel
mm,
like they get the result, they're focused on the result, they're not thinking about the person behind it. And
mm,
so, where the influence might have happened and they've got the result, it's come at the expense of the relationship. And
mm.
so you either don't get that relationship continuing
Yeah.
or the relationship it's rocky,
Mm,
and this isn't just anti-procurement, right? That I'm talking about here. I'm talking about people
yeah.
in all sorts of roles, so that it's not a procurement specific thing there. But when we talk about influence in the workshops that I do and in the one-to-one coaching, we really go back to, again, natural personality styles, the who, as I said, really narrow it down, but also look at the other person and see what common ground you can find with that person. And
Mm,
go into this thinking that your stakeholders are not defensive, that they're not anti-procurement. Go into this seeing the person behind the role.
mm.
Always,
Yeah.
always. Because it might feel a longer road and
Yeah.
not a shortcut. You might feel like you've got a deadline to hit where we need to just get it done. But I tell you something, people can smell it from a mile off. If they
Mm,
feel that you are using tactics that are not genuine or legitimate, they will notice it. They'll notice it in themselves, how they feel about it. And those genuine relationships that you build and where legitimate influence comes from are these genuine relationships are the solid foundations for being very good at what you do and being able to do it at those senior
mm.
levels.
Yeah, great points. And actually, when you were talking early on there, it just kind of made me think about, the different styles of working with suppliers as well, and
Mm,
the kind of the old school, very bullish, aggressive negotiating style just to get the price down at the expense of the relationship versus, some of the more future looking, longer term business partnering type relationship with suppliers. And actually, if you look at the last few years and the pandemic, and how many businesses had to suddenly really call on those suppliers and ask for big massive favors, in order to really be able to continue running their operation in the way that they needed to in these changed events. And I think a lot of organizations where they'd kind of negotiated so hard often at the expense of the relationship,
mm.
where that relationship is there, whether it is a person, a stakeholder, or a person at a supplier. It's like, people are willing to go that extra mile, I think, where there is a genuine relationship in place. And yeah, so it kind of, when you were talking, it just, reminded me of, those different ways in which, people describe, negotiating, etc., and working with suppliers. It's the same thing.
And it's such a great point, like you say, that when the negotiating does have to be hard, or when there is a time limit where there's some urgency, it can feel like, well, we just need to get the result at the expense of the relationship. And also, we live in such an impatient world, a world that expects everything on demand. You buy something, it's here the next day when you order it
Mm,
online. We expect instant results. And that's where I think we do have to have patience because relationships are built over time. And we've talked about, we've known each other for a while now, but our relationship is building as we make this podcast before we decided to do the podcast. And
yeah.
we're really excited to see where that takes us. But we're also aware that that is going to come with time and you can't cheat time in that sense,
Mm,
can you, in terms of getting to know someone? So I think always think about the long-term impact when it comes to the people you're trying to influence, and that can also be really hard if there's high turnover in an
yeah.
organization. You're thinking internally, well, what's the point? But I think legacies of relationships last a long time as well. So always go with the long-term success in mind. And I can give you an example where I knew of, I'm gonna have to be a bit cryptic here, but I knew of very senior leader who achieved great results in a business unit and they did great things. They took it from the ground up. It was brilliant. They then left and their reputation stayed for a long, long time afterwards.
Mm,
And people avoided the business unit because of the reputation that was no of somebody that was no longer there. So even if there is a high turnover of staff, or you think, well, what's the point? They might leave. If I try to build this relationship, I need the result now. There is always a legacy to relationships and how people do things. And we
mm,
don't, hold on, I'm not sat here on a pedestal going, I've always done it right. I
yeah.
can go back and look at many times when I've done it wrong, many times. And I'm happy to hold my hand up to that. And this is why it's so important to me, because I've really studied this and to understand where legitimate influence comes from when it is
Mm,
a case of partnership, not power. Because if there is a power imbalance in relationships, influence is a very, very tricky thing to achieve in a in,
mm,
in a in a genuine way. So yeah, I think definitely always think with the long term in mind, even if there are people who move on.
mm. And I mean, again, going back to kind of some one of the topics we've spoken about recently, but I think that storytelling kind of the art of storytelling as part of your communication style, actually, in an internal setting, often particularly, if you're indirects and you've got stakeholders all over the place in large organizations, I think the ability to be able to showcase and tell stories about the impact that you've had with maybe other people, other stakeholders in different parts of the business, and really kind of, show the difference that your support and interaction kind of had, like that ability, that kind of, presenting that and kind of showcasing that, telling that story in the right way can make a really big difference when it comes to kind of building that credibility and building that trust and and kind of the and ultimately the influence. But it's an interesting one because I primarily am working with individuals that are considering whether they're going to, try and do some kind of move internally, externally. Some of them are active now, some of them are not. But they'll reach a point where they secure that role, and then often I'm supporting them with navigating the move into often that new leadership role. And I think, influence, often we think about the one-to-one interactions internally, but when you're moving into a new leadership role, at some point the business is going to announce your arrival to the team, and then often at some point they will start announcing your kind of your arrival to stakeholders internally. And often they're like, oh, who is this person? Let's check them out on LinkedIn. And, I think LinkedIn comes up quite a bit because it is quite it can be quite an emotive topic. But I think, LinkedIn done well can actually influence the first impression that some of those people have of you, because that's a space where sometimes you can start to demonstrate some of your credibility before you've even got in that room with that stakeholder. And the chances are, if they don't know you, LinkedIn will often be the first place that they'll look to understand, who is this person that's just stuck an hour in my diary and said we need to talk, or who is this person that the CFO has just announced who's going to be coming in to shake up procurement. And I think actually, how you choose to present yourself on a platform like LinkedIn, like, it's not then about the getting the new job. It's like, actually, that's your kind of shop window, if you like. And that's often the first impression
Mm.
that stakeholder will have. And so you can choose. We all have choice. Do we go on there? Do we not? Do we participate? Do we update our profile? But, again, I think the evolution with a lot of my clients is, we might go back to their LinkedIn, and it's kind of initially the LinkedIn might be designed for securing that next big role. But then once they're moving into it, it's like, actually now it's more about how can you use that window to start the early pieces of influence before you've met that person. And again, I think sometimes sharing some successes, obviously in the right way, in a way that it doesn't feel like you're arrogantly bragging about things, that it can help to shape that view early on.
Mm. Yeah, and I like what you say about a shop window, because even though we're talking about LinkedIn there, and it's making me laugh because I know that might happen to a new procurement leader who's going into a new business, and people are checking them out. I think you could also have procurement as the shop window. What's the brand of procurement in the organization? What do the policies look like? Where does the engagement come in at leadership meetings? How do you position the team and the function within the organization? But going back to as well, something else that you were saying about the influence, and I'm totally lost my thread now about that. So yeah. Uh,
Okay, I'm sure it'll
so
come back in a
it will
moment.
come back, but I can see it, tell I'm passionate about this. I've got lots of different things going off about that. But I think it's just like we've said with many things, it is a bit of a journey, right? Because
Mm,
you've got, like you say, you've got your initial quick wins maybe when it comes to
Mm,
influence, but you've always got to take a long-term view. And I think this is where as well, if you know you've got a huge procurement project, let's say you're doing a tender or whatever it is you're doing, let's say it's 6 months, 9 months down the line, you've got a really busy diary as it is, make the intentional effort to build that relationship now with the
mm,
stakeholder that you might not need that relationship with for another 6 months, because it is a lot easier to motivate a stakeholder to act and to involve procurement at the right time if that relationship is already in place. So that's definitely something that I would recommend being part
yeah,
of the journey when it comes to influence. You
yeah,
know, it's definitely something that that we work on, together in the coaching, because it depends on where they are. If they've already got some of those relationships, and also, like we've said about network before, leverage the relationships you've already got that might help you to influence the ones you need to influence that you don't yet have a relationship with.
mm,
Use the network internally, because and this is where you might need social proof of where you've already got a good relationship with a particular stakeholder in an organization. You're trying to get another stakeholder on
yeah,
board. Use your storytelling and your social proof for where this has worked well, what you've overcome with another stakeholder, and bring it back there. So I think that's
yeah,
something else that we need to
yeah.
be really mindful of.
And I think that social proofing, again, I know that's come up previously, and for me, that the world that we're living in right now, we are living in a world where people need and want and crave that social proof. They like we rarely book a restaurant, do we, without reading reviews or buy anything. And so, for big decisions and for confidence and kind of reassurance, like people take so much comfort when they're hearing the same thing, often from a variety of people. It can
Yeah.
really help to support. And again, we've spoken about kind of the just the gift of feedback.
Mm,
um in order to build those stories that you're sharing with people, like actually kind of, sometimes just asking for the feedback, but getting that feedback, sometimes getting it, in a different format, getting it in writing, getting it, internally to be shared internally, actually think about kind of, whether you're getting the feedback in a format that you can use as part of that kind of that evidence and that storytelling. And that new stakeholder, challenging stakeholder, often, if they can actually see like comments of a few of their peer group, and kind of the difference that working with them has made, like, sometimes I think it's like, how come you've not been working with me? Like, they're getting all this value, why are we not? So,
mm,
social proof, whether you're whether you're looking for a job, in a job, wanting to build influence, like it just, evidence, showing the difference that's been made, not
mm.
telling the difference. Like, it
Yeah.
just changes everything.
It really does. And like you say, the social proof, it's the consistency in the message as well, when they're starting to see that other people are engaged with you and are doing are working with you in a really collaborative way. That definitely helps. It's another, I guess, principle to work
Mm,
off when it comes to influence. I think the other thing I would say, I did touch on it earlier when I was talking about power dynamics and about being on the same level as somebody. And these are coaching skills as well, by the way. When we coach people, we coach as partners. We don't coach as we know more than you. It's definitely something we co-create together when it comes to the coaching program. I think ultimately a lot of people want to feel seen and heard. And given that procurement need to constantly make their case for being that strategic lever, do not underestimate the power of making your stakeholders feel seen and heard. It's not, it's
mm,
obviously important to advance procurement's cause, and we're a lot of the time seeking that validation or recognition.
mm,
But the power, and you said about it being empowering earlier on, the power is in leading with those same principles and leading with,
yeah,
making your stakeholders feel seen and heard. Because when we do, we trust people. And influence, legitimate, genuine, authentic influence will always come from a basis of trust.
Mm,
So yeah, and I think that's why when I launched my Procure framework with the coaching qualifications, even though you think, well, why does somebody need coaching skills as a procurement professional if unless you're just going to go and be a coach like what we are? They're so valuable in terms of internal influence because you're doing it from a place of partnership and then you're
mm,
also able to support other people's development. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot there's a lot to be said for the very first part of influence, which is the relationship building. And you can do
mm,
that. You've got different ways of doing that regardless of your personality type. It won't be the
yeah.
same journey for everybody. That's why knowing yourself also is really valuable.
And I just think like, so many of these topics that we talk about, they do come down to relationships. And, we're talking about like, influence is like, it's what, again, another one of those emotive words that kind
Mm.
of, worries people, concerns people. Sometimes they, the thing that they know they need to get really good at. Same as networking, I'd compare the two actually in terms of sometimes the kind of the expectation, but they do come down to those relationship building skills. And
Mm.
yeah, I think yeah, the ability to build good, solid relationships, mutually beneficial relationships with individuals inside of work, outside of work, for your own benefit, for your company's benefit. It's like, that as a skill, like just it's just so valuable, so valuable. And you can do so much with that. And actually, maybe it's, sometimes it is maybe reframing some of the language you're using for yourself and,
Yeah.
putting yourself under this pressure. I have to network. Well, how do you feel about building relationships? And, again, with the influence, I have to influence that person. Yeah, or could you kind of look at it as that I just need to keep building momentum with the relationship with that individual?
Mm. Yeah, like I say, reframing back to what we said at the very beginning about mindset, right? Because I think influence can be an automatic like deal breaker for someone thinking, oh, I can't do that. I had a client who
Mm,
was saying, I realize I avoid this stakeholder. So, okay, how do we feel about building the relationship, taking an interest in them? Take the pressure off yourself because for
yeah,
feeling like you have to influence by showcasing who you are, that is an important part of it. But influence also comes from being, like you said in a previous episode, about being interested rather
yeah,
than just making sure that you're interesting. And that for me
yeah,
takes the pressure off. If you're thinking, well, actually, instead of worrying about what I'm showcasing, how about I show more interest in the person who's in front of me? And you'll be amazed at how
yeah.
much of a strong relationship you can build when you take that approach.
Yeah. And I think again, like coming back to that intentionality, and giving yourself some space to think about, actually, because we bounce from one call to another, one meeting to another.
Yeah.
And particularly thinking about like a lot of what we're talking about today is that internal influence, but just
Mm,
giving yourself a bit of time rather than just landing in that meeting with that stakeholder. It's actually just giving yourself a bit of time to think, actually, like, how am I going to approach that conversation with them? Like, questions, like curiosity and questions are everything. And it's actually thinking, in advance, like, what are the kind of questions that I want answered when I go into that, rather than just going in and kind of, we wing a lot of these conversations. We just go in, we think it's fine, we don't think in advance necessarily, or give ourselves the time to think about, what's the ideal outcome here, and how, what questions would I most love to ask, what questions are most important, and kind of, even just a few minutes to plan some of that
mm,
can make a massive difference. But yeah, totally agree on that. The interested, and it comes back to your point of people want to feel listened to, they want
yeah.
to feel seen, they want to feel understood, they want to feel that they're working or partnering with someone that actually cares and actually gets their own unique set of
Mm,
circumstance and isn't just trying to apply their solution without really understanding the ins and outs of the challenge or the problem that's to be solved.
yeah. Yeah, great points. Really great points. It's such a complex topic. I mean, I find it
Uh,
fascinating because I think as well, depending on how you have experienced influence in the past, can really influence, for want of a better word, how you see it moving forward. So, yeah, I think that the environments we've worked in and how we've seen it done by others can also really impact. But as we always say, this is about bringing it back to what you can control, how you can feel empowered to
mm,
drive a better influence relationship, whether that is in the context of, looking for new roles or if it's in your
mm,
internal organization. It's a skill set that is very versatile and it can feel like a dark art. But I think once you've intertwined the mindset piece with the skill set, I think, you're onto a path to success, really.
mm. And I'd say for those people that are looking for their next role, kind of obviously I opened up by saying the majority of businesses, this is one of the top skills that they're
Mm,
asking for when they're hiring into often senior or maybe strategic procurement roles. And so, I would really, really encourage you to think about how are you showcasing your successful examples of where you have been able to influence and where you've had an impact, like showing it rather than just saying it. Like so many nowadays, there's so much competition for a lot of the most attractive big senior roles often. And just saying I'm good at influencing, everyone says they're good at influencing, that doesn't mean they're good at influencing. It's kind of how can you actually demonstrate that and show some really good examples, and show the before, show the after, show the difference that skill of influencing actually had on that situation.
yeah, yeah, great
It's
point.
storytelling, isn't it?
And I guess influence as well, part of it's a bit subjective, isn't it? How do you measure influence, right?
Mm.
That's another thing where you think, well, it could be in the savings, it could be in the number of engaged stakeholders. It's going to be different for every single person. But like you
Yeah.
say, to say you're good at influencing and to understand your relationship with, it's going to be a unique thing for everybody,
Mm.
and a unique journey. So
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I
Well,
enjoyed this one. Oh, I enjoy all
I
of them, but yeah,
was
this
going to
is
say.
yeah, I do enjoy all of them. But I think, definitely a very, very relevant topic in the conversations that I have. So yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot, like I say, a lot of the workshops are focused on this.
Mm.
So yeah.
Well, hopefully this is a lot of food for thought for those
Mm,
of you that are listening and watching. And, as always, we'd encourage you just to kind of think about, you're not going to put all of this into practice, but actually, what is that one thing that you're taking
mm,
away from today? And, how could that make a difference to you and the people around you? And we'd love you to share, like, we'd love to
yeah,
hear, like, we're enjoying this journey, but we most enjoy hearing that it's actually making a difference. Like we're not
yeah.
doing this for us, we're doing it because we care and we want to make a difference to the people watching and listening. So please do let us know, kind of what you're taking away. And look, if you've put it into practice, like how's it gone? Like,
Mm,
what were the challenges? What went well? So yeah, I've enjoyed today as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in and watching. And again, as always, if you do, if this subject has resonated, or kind of, anything else in your career, and you think you might want to have a conversation with someone, you hopefully now know where we both are, and feel free to reach out to either of us or both of us, and discuss what that kind of help and support would look like.
yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure doing this, isn't it? We really
Yeah,
enjoy having these conversations, but the feedback as well that we do get already has been great to hear that it's helping people. They might be driving to the
yeah.
office, and I have to share this one because I know we've had a bit of a laugh about my lovely overuse maybe of metaphors. And if you've been listening for a long time since the start, you might remember the eating an elephant one piece at a time. I've been assured by a client who listened to it the other day who said, that definitely exists in my neck of the woods. So I wasn't on
Just
my
me
own.
then, just me.
But brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
No, thanks,
Bye bye.
thanks for tuning in. We hope it's been helpful, and yeah, reach out if you want anything.
Yeah. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Procurement Pivots, We hope today's episode gave you actionable tips to help you to continue to move forward in your procurement career.
If you enjoyed the conversation, follow our episodes, share them with others, and please support us on our social media channels for others that might be interested to tune in.